今日午後2時7分ごろ、鳥取県中部を震源とするマグニチュード 6.6 の地震があり、鳥取県倉吉市と湯梨浜町、それに北栄町で震度6弱の激しい揺れを観測しました。
A strong earthquake shook western Japan early this morning. Almost 80,000 households suffered from initial blackouts there. There are reports of structural damage to homes, but only a handful of minor injuries have been reported so far. Several major highways are closed while the damage is assessed. No tsunami warning has been issued.
Typhoon Haima, measuring 8 out of 10 on the authorities' severe storm scale, shut down Hong Kong on Friday morning, closing schools, businesses, stock markets and offices. The city's streets were deserted as nearly 200 trees were blown down by wind gusting at more than 100 kilometres an hour. A 50-year-old man was reported dead after falling and hitting his head on a rock by the seafront, and between 8 and 12 injuries were also reported. At the airport, over 700 flights were cancelled, and the city was estimated to have lost more than $500 million in revenue. In eastern Taiwan, low-lying roads were flooded as heavy rain hit. Meanwhile, in the northern Philippines, people began returning to their homes after Haima, the strongest storm in 3 years, hit them. It left a trail of destruction that killed at least 12 people after triggering flooding, landslides and power cuts. Evacuations of high-risk communities helped prevent a larger number of casualties, the authorities said.
Continuing to follow some breaking news this afternoon, there was a second cyber attack that was hit the cloud-based internet company Dyn, which has impacted several major websites. It includes Amazon and even Gmail. Twitter also says that its users may be having trouble accessing its site as well. Both of them were hit by this attack.
In the reports of this, I know that the Department of Homeland Security, that is the U.S. government agency that is responsible for monitoring our security in cyberspace and coordinating with the public and private sector to protect U.S. interests in cyberspace, is monitoring this situation, and they'll take a close look at it. But at this point, I don't have any information to share about who may be responsible for that malicious activity.
The world's busiest shipping lane got a whole lot busier of late. NATO and EU ships have flocked to the British coast where a Russian fleet is passing on its way to the Mediterranean. It's in international waters, but it's got the Alliance on alert. Laura Smith's got the story.
This flotilla of 8 ships headed by the Admiral Kuznetsov has headed down the eastern coast of the UK and, of course, into the English Channel, into the Dover Straits. The Norwegian Air Force filmed them when they were off the Shetland Islands. Those are some pretty great pictures. And then locals and media gathered to watch them in Dover. And, of course, they could see them off the coast because it's just 21 miles wide, that stretch of water. That was earlier on Friday. And, of course, they're being watched very closely by ships from the navies of a number of different countries. There's the UK's HMS Duncan, of course, which has been man-marking the flotilla, according to the Defence Secretary. The Norwegians, the Finnish, they all have ships in the area that are watching the progress of these destroyers, and several NATO vessels and planes as well. And in fact, the NATO chief, Jens Stoltenberg, came out with comments saying that the Russian Navy is free to operate. These are international waters, but that he does have concerns about where they're heading.
Russia, of course, has the right to operate in international waters, and this is not the first time we've seen this carrier group being deployed in the Mediterranean. But what creates concern now is that this carrier group may be used to contribute to military operations in Syria and be used to increase attacks on Aleppo.
That follows on from UK Defence Secretary's comments yesterday, Michael Fallon, about keeping Britain safe. And of course, the newspapers have carried on this theme on Friday. They're using language about these ships that's really notable. They talk about them lurking, marauding, invading. The Daily Mail has gone with "the Russians are here," and the Express says "Russian nuclear power on our doorstep." So this is really an ongoing thing in the media today.
Despite a Russian ceasefire, the United Nations human rights chief has described Aleppo as a slaughterhouse, saying the siege and bombing of eastern districts amount to war crimes. He didn't specifically mention Russia, whose planes have supported the Syrian Air Force. In a video speech to the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, he accused all parties of violating international law.
Armed opposition groups continue to fire mortars and other projectiles into civilian neighborhoods of western Aleppo, but indiscriminate airstrikes across the eastern part of the city by government forces and their allies are responsible for the overwhelming majority of civilian casualties, and these violations constitute war crimes.
Russia has announced an extension of its ceasefire until Saturday evening. It says the pause is to allow civilians and fighters who lay down their weapons to leave Aleppo. The foreign minister says he suspects the West wants to protect a Syrian militant group. Jabhat al-Nusra and other organizations that cooperate with them are sabotaging the UN efforts, backed by the Russian and Syrian governments, to set up humanitarian supplies in eastern Aleppo. The routes that such humanitarian aid can go through are being directly shelled. The UN said medical evacuations hadn't begun as hoped on Friday because of a lack of security guarantees and agreement with all sides. It wants to use the Russian pause in the bombing to evacuate the sick and wounded. Many people are understood to be reluctant to leave.
A Fox News alert, and for the last hour and a half or so, officials in London have been dealing with the evacuation of London City Airport. It's a smaller airport, not as big as Heathrow or Gatwick, closer to downtown London. Officials say passengers started feeling ill. Many of them, as you can see, have stepped outside of the building, gone out onto the tarmac, and all of the flights in and out of London City Airport are being held right now. Some type of chemical spill or chemical fire and fumes making people sick is getting the blame. London authorities are warning travelers to expect long delays. We're told that at least 2 people have been hospitalized. Ambulance crews treated 26 people there at the scene for difficulty breathing. Weird situation. We don't know what is the cause of it yet. Some kind of chemical incident at London City Airport. When we get more information, we'll bring it to you live.
A Russian hacker suspected of targeting the United States is being held this morning in the Czech Republic. The FBI helped Czech police take the man into custody 2 weeks ago, but the arrest was only revealed a few hours ago. The suspect was nabbed during a surprise raid at a hotel in Prague. Jeff Pegues has details of the investigation and what it could mean for U.S.-Russian relations. Jeff, good morning.
Good morning. The Russian hacker now faces extradition to the U.S. He was picked up on October 5th during a joint operation by Czech police and the FBI after an Interpol red notice was issued for his arrest. The takedown was on videotape. The man appeared to be caught off guard as police moved in to make the arrest. Police say he fainted and was taken to a hospital for treatment. Authorities say he is connected to cyber attacks on the United States, but investigators have not offered any more specifics than that. Just 2 days after his arrest, the Obama administration blamed Russia for the cyber attack on Democratic Party officials that compromised emails. And at the time of his arrest, U.S. law enforcement sources were telling CBS News that they believe the Russians are trying to influence the U.S. election by scanning and probing voter databases in several states. It is still unclear if the man taken into custody is connected to those cyber attacks, but the U.S. has vowed to respond to the attacks. An official told CBS News that the response would be proportional.
I was inside of a building, yes, and we could see that it just looked like a heavy fog had just moved in, and then all at once you started smelling, and I was like, I asked my sister, I said, are you smelling, are you cleaning with bleach or something? And then it was like a burning smell. It was very strong.
And of course you guys stayed inside. I think it was a luncheon you were setting up for or something?
We were actually hosting a breakfast this morning for some of the some of the staff out at the Atchison Hospital who left very quickly after all of this started.
And then you began getting messages. What were those messages telling you guys to stay in place?
Yes, messages were saying do not go outside, do not breathe any of that in. We were looking out the windows watching the cars that were stopped at the stoplights and stop signs in front of the building we were in, and everyone had their jackets and coats up covering their noses, and it was pretty scary when it happened.
Jessica Hicklin, an inmate sentenced to life at age 16, made a promise to herself that she wouldn't live more than half her life as someone else. At 36, she had her name legally changed and came out as a transgender woman within the prison walls. After doctors diagnosed her with gender dysphoria and recommended she go on hormone therapy, the Missouri DOC refused to get her treatment, considering she hadn't started it before entering the prison. Now, Hicklin is suing the Missouri DOC and Corazon, the healthcare company that supports her facility.
And to the first American killed in Iraq in this urgent effort to take out ISIS. Americans are backing up the Iraqis right now, and this evening, look at this. A missile taking aim at a car driven by an ISIS suicide bomber. That car destroyed just one of several missiles, and you're about to see them all. ABC's Alex Marquardt on the front lines again tonight.
An ISIS suicide bomber speeding towards advancing forces today. Rocket finally taking it out. Then that second car bomb, the U.S.-backed Kurdish forces making the direct hit. Suicide bombers have been the go-to tactic of ISIS, dozens deployed. And tonight, possibly a new weapon. Drones, some armed with explosives. Kurdish forces spraying the sky and bringing one of them down. Today saw some of the fiercest fighting yet. U.S. soldiers assisting from the air and advising on the ground. Tonight mourning one of their own, that American service member killed by an IED. The commander of the U.S.-led coalition telling the BBC ISIS will likely use human shields.
They are a very resilient and challenging foe. They're very adaptable, very creative, cunning. We've seen all kinds of examples of that.
David, we're learning tonight that this battle is playing out online as well. Britain, which is part of the coalition, saying that cyber warfare is being used against ISIS for the first time in this campaign.
They came rolling up one by one, clowns visiting Mexico for their 21st Latin American convention. But this time round, it wasn't all jokes and smiles. "We're clowns, not killers," they chanted. They're worried about a recent trend of sinister clowns who are terrorizing the public. In Mexico, clubs of clown hunters are springing up on Facebook. These men caught one lurking in the northern city of Monterrey. But normal clowns are also being threatened.
I don't think it's fair to hit someone who has nothing to do with the killer clowns. It's really affecting us. They're threatening us physically. They're killing us. There's a lot of stress in going out dressed like this.
They told us people are now thinking twice before hiring them for events. But it's not all worry and strife. Some clowns were up at 4 a.m. preparing for the prestigious makeup competition, while others swapped tricks and learnt extreme balloon tying. They've come from 14 countries around Latin America. Alvaro's here from Guatemala. He's a policeman and says his costume helps him to reach out to young people.
Extortion from gangs has overwhelmed the civilian population and the authorities.
But a clown in the street can make you forget those bad things. Those street artists will be the ones that make you smile.
Modern clowning arrived in Mexico in the 1920s, and in the 70s, economic troubles led to a multitude of new performers trying their luck on the streets. And there, the tradition has stayed. Clowning might have gone a bit out of fashion in other places, but here in Mexico, it's still a staple, not just at birthday parties and in the circus, but also it's very common to see clowns performing in the street and at traffic lights. After all the negative publicity, this is the face that Latin American clowns want to show the world. John Holman, Al Jazeera, Mexico City.
There was a transient female walking down the 2900 block of Connie. She actually had a skull in her possession.
It sounds like a story fit for Halloween.
She actually had a skull in her possession.
A call to police on Wednesday that is now a death investigation.
A call like this is not something that happens every day, and we hope we can get down to the bottom of what caused this person to become deceased.
Officers confronted the woman at this abandoned house on Connie Drive where their investigation began.
She brought the officers to the area where she located this skull.
A couple of blocks down to Crosby Way at an abandoned homeless encampment. Detectives, officers, and crime scene technicians spent several hours between Wednesday afternoon and today combing the area for clues.
And when the officers went out there, they located a decomposed body.
This is their spot. Philip lives in a house next to the encampment where he says the homeless woman he called Victoria has lived for years. He pointed to the exact location where the body was discovered a few feet from her stuff.
Right there. Right past those bushes right there you see?
Yes.
Okay, to the right back there.
This guy's house is also next to the encampment. He smelled something foul, thinking it was a dead cat.
I walked back there, and I said, damn, what the hell was this smell? It made me sick to my stomach, so I turned my eyes around and came on back up here.
Here's one for the road. A South Carolina man couldn't believe his eyes when he looked up and he saw an angel.
Yes. It was cloud in the sky. Is that not an angel
Corey
or what?
Heron took out his phone saying that he felt compelled to share what he was seeing. It is now going viral. Not only that, he says that it was a sign that came at the perfect time because he was struggling with his spirituality. God was telling him.
This is awful. It's also not something you see every day, and thankfully, because it is exactly what it appears to be, a chimpanzee who has become the main attraction at Pyongyang Central Zoo. It's a 19-year-old female. She is named Azalea, and she lights and then smokes cigarettes, all on her own. And thankfully, the zoo trainer in question actually tosses the chimpanzee a lighter so that she can start smoking, which is amazing, right? Officials claim that she smokes about a pack a day. They insist that she doesn't inhale, so hey, I suppose that makes it okay.